This is Safe for Work, the Workopolis podcast.
Hi, I'm Sal Chalfi, and today on the podcast, social media. 76% of companies are using social media today, and there's good reason for that. There are 2.3 billion people using social media around the world. That's billion with a B. Are you one of those companies? If you're not, don't worry. I'm with Madison McGee, Workopolis' social media manager, to get some tips on how to get started and to figure out why it's important. Hi, Maddie.
Hi, Sal.
So, how did you get started with social media?
Two ways, actually. The first was professionally, I was in a communications career, and social media was a very small aspect of what it was that I was doing. And I loved it. I found myself doing more social media than I probably should have at the time. So I took that experience and I decided to create my own audience to really build my own portfolio. So I started a blog doing that, which, shameless plug, it's called The Restless Worker. I can't even say it. And I really just built up my following from there, and social media is now my life. I do it 24 hours a day, pretty much.
That was a travel blog, right?
It was, yes.
Or it is a travel blog, I should say.
Yeah, it still exists.
Okay, so employer branding gets discussed a lot when it comes to social media, but what does that mean exactly?
It's really about your reputation online. When people are applying for a job, probably one of the first things that they do is look up who you are and what it is that you're saying online through social media, through companies like Glassdoor. So when it comes to employer branding and hiring, you really want to make sure that the message you get across to future employees is really consistent online. So reputation is definitely one of the most important things.
Okay, so who would you say is a good example of a company using social media for branding and for recruiting?
There's tons out there. I mean, you think of the big guys like Google or Apple who have done an outstanding job. I mean, people are dying to get into work for them. But then there's also the smaller guys, like Quest Trade Careers is one of the best ones that we've seen so far. They have a great Twitter chat that they do consistently on a monthly basis. They're also very engaging on Twitter with their audience. They're making sure to retweet, to reshare, that kind of stuff. And they also post job hunting tips for those who are interested, not only just applying to their own career site, but any career site in general. Mm-hmm. Nestle is a good example when it comes to Pinterest. They've done a really great job sharing events that they have going on at their company, bios of employees that they have, and just general office photos. And then you have Shopify, who's done a really great job creating that. They've created a hashtag, actually, for their employees to share, and it's really encouraging their employees to showcase the fun things that their company's doing together, or fun things that are happening around the office.
Okay, so there's clearly a lot of different ways you could approach this. What would be the first steps that a company should take before they set out on social media?
I think before you do anything, you need to sit back and think about where it makes sense for you to be online. You really want to be strategic in where you are focusing your time and efforts. As a small business owner, or someone who doesn't necessarily have a dedicated social media manager, you don't have time to be spending hours upon hours a day on social media. So you want to get the biggest bang for your buck, and I think that boils down to where your audience is going to be.
Okay, so what are some of the differences between the major platforms today? I know there's a lot you can say about this, but maybe just a brief overview of some of the major players out there today.
For sure, yeah, that could pretty much be its own podcast.
Yeah.
But when you have stuff like Facebook, where you can post a lot of different types of media, so photos, videos, text posting. Instagram is more photo-based, as is Pinterest. LinkedIn is a lot of B2B content where it makes sense to be specifically focusing on recruiting. And then you have Twitter, which is kind of a gamut of everything, but it's all done in a succinct manner within 140 characters, which can sometimes be pretty tough.
Cool. So there's all these different platforms, there's different types of content and styles of content that you could use. Are there any tools that companies can use though to manage all of this? Because it seems like it could be quite involved.
Oh, absolutely. One of the best ones that we use here at Workopolis is Hootsuite. It's a great platform to let you pre-schedule any posts that you have across all your social media platforms. We use it consistently. I mean, you have to keep in mind, you don't want to set it and forget it when it comes to social media. It's great to pre-schedule certain things like any sales you have going on or content that you have coming out on a certain day, but you still want to be engaging at the same time. It's just a great way to get that one push out on a consistent basis. Things like Lightroom or Photoshop are great when it comes to photo editing. TweetDeck is a free one as well if you don't like the way that Hootsuite is set up. And Google Analytics, I think, is a really important one as a small business owner when you can manage that website, because it really lets you see where people are coming from to visit your website, like what social platforms are getting the most engagement and the most traffic to you, and that helps you to cater where it is that you're spending more of your time on social media.
Okay, so it's not just about figuring out where your competitors are, it's also understanding where your audience is.
For
I guess,
sure.
right? Okay. Earlier you mentioned Shopify's hashtag. Most people know what hashtags are, but
Hopefully.
hopefully. But are there any tips you'd give on how to actually properly use a hashtag? And sometimes on my Instagram feed, for example, I see people with, it seems like 1,000 hashtags.
Yeah.
Is that proper usage of it, or is that overkill?
It is. There's actually a limit of 30 hashtags per post on Instagram, but they're used differently on every platform. So Pinterest and LinkedIn, you don't use hashtags. It's not something that they've brought into their platforms, so it doesn't make sense. But when it comes to Twitter, 1 or 2 or maybe 3 max hashtags that you use per tweet is ideal. I mean, you only have so much room, so you can't be hashtagging everything. Facebook, it's the same thing. You don't want to be too over hashtag heavy, and you're seeing hashtags starting to go away, with Facebook, because they do keyword searching as opposed to hashtags. So you don't necessarily have to use them there, but they're best used, I think, on Instagram and Twitter.
Okay. And in that vein, what would you say are some of the do's and don'ts of corporate social media use?
Well, I think first and foremost, you should have a policy when it comes to use with your employees. You need to make sure that they're keeping consistent with your employer brand and what your company stands for and the messaging that you have. But at the same time, you want to encourage them to use it like Shopify does. So making sure that the employees understand the content that they should be sharing and shouldn't be sharing, I think, is most important. You also want to be professional and putting out your messaging to the general public and working on your brand as an employer as well. I mean, it's incredibly important, and keeping away from things like politics and religion where it can get pretty sticky is definitely something you want to avoid. We've seen things like the McDonald's tweet that went out recently, and anything that Donald Trump puts out. I mean,
but you could argue that actually was a good source of publicity for McDonald's, right?
Very true. It worked out for them in a lot of ways, but I'm sure that social media manager may not be there anymore.
Fair enough. Well, okay, great advice, Maddie. And for more on recruiting with social media, including an overview of all those major platforms we mentioned, please go to the resource section at hiring.workopolis.com to download our e-guide, Building Your Employer Brand with Social Media. And at that same link, you'll also find our blog for employers, which has a lot of advice on recruiting, human resources, and management. Thanks, Maddie.
Thank you.
Safe for Work is produced by me, Sal Chalfie, Paige McGarry, and Madison McKee. It's executive produced by Lana Chen and Anne Valeri. Music by the band Code Pie.
You've been listening to Safe for Work, the Workopolis podcast.